the practicing of my video tools that I have, my microphone, my camera. Am I using Mac? Am I going to use this? What am I going to use? Um, so it's been a journey, I tell you, because I'm not. And if you ask, if you ask my son, I am not built this way for computers. In some aspect I am, and I can do it, and but I get so frustrated. It's frustrating to me. So, the lighting, the all that stuff. Oh, look, I'm going to prune my plant while I'm doing my video. Anyway, so here we go. I have decided that because it's taking longer than I wanted it to for my books now, um, I've been encouraged to make some videos just to kind of let people know what my book entails. You see, in 2019, 2018, really, in 2018, I started my healing journey. I had gone into my therapist appointment that day, and I was ready to give up on life. I told my therapist that I wanted to remove myself from this planet. And, she had some real concerns because she's like, do you have a gun in your home? And, all these things. So there was a big ordeal. And to me, anyway, it was. And so I was becoming an empty nester. And for someone who has sacrificed their lives for everyone else around them, their whole life, I was becoming an empty nester and I didn't know what to do with my life. I was also approaching that 6-8 year mark where I've shared in the past that in 2012 I was diagnosed with AIDS. And they told me that when I was diagnosed, because my CD4 count was 14, I had a CD4 count of 14. When you get to 200 CD4 count, that means you're full blown AIDS. And there's no turning back from that. And when I had 14, they told me that if I hadn't come into the emergency room that day, that I probably would have been dead in 2 weeks and 14 days. But because I came in and was going to start the process of the medications, and it was going to be okay as long as I took my medication at the same time every day and never missed a dose, that I would have 6 to 8 good years to live. And those 6 to 8 years were horrible. On the outside looking in, people would look at me, looking back now, I understand now why people would say, how are you doing this? How are you surviving? How are you putting a smile on your face every day? And I learned this long ago as a child. I was always put in situations that I should have never been put on. Places, things, um, that as a child were dangerous. And I had a rough upbringing with an unemotional family, a family that rarely shared their feelings or emotions. And I was one I was all up on those feelings. I was always feeling. I was always having emotions. And I cried a lot as a child too. If you ask anybody in my family, especially my brother or my mom, you'll ask them, yeah, she was always crying. I was. I was an emotional child. I was taking on all the emotions of everyone that was important in my family because they weren't. And it was something that I learned early that I was different. Oh, so much different that you ask my mom and any relatives or neighbors at the time. I told everybody I was adopted because I did not belong in this family. I was so far different than the rest of my family that I knew that there was something different. As a child, I knew. But as I grew older, a lot of the differences that I knew that I had, I pushed down. I would push them away or because I was always told, oh, Denise, you're being too much. It's not always about you, Denise. Um, that's not what was said. That's not what was meant. You're reading into things. You're analyzing things too much. You're looking at this the wrong way. And so when people told me that all of my life, well, what are you going to do? You're going to have to start believing it or you're going to buck against the system, one of the two. And as a young girl who was so insecure about her life and her belonging, I was always reaching for something, trying to learn something new about where I'm supposed to be in my life because obviously I don't fit in. I don't, I'm not, I'm a misfit. I don't fit in. And so I would go to different churches. I would go to different clubs. I would get to meet different people. And during my journey, I met some people that weren't all that good for me. And apparently, you don't know it if you're in it. Um, you're sometimes told by people on the outside, like, hey, listen, like one of my bosses back in 19, well, this was right before 2000, right before Quentin was born. I worked at Citicorp. And my boss pulled me aside and she's like, that church you belong to has been, titled as a cult. And we actually had some news breakout with our church. It was called the Hope Luth, or no, that's a different church. It was called the St. Louis Church of Christ, part of the International Churches of Christ. And we were all about discipleship and living in the kingdom of God and serving and following scripture. But then it was interesting to me that some of the scripture we'd follow, but some of it we wouldn't. And it was always about don't tether yourself with an unbeliever. Oh, there's a little notification. Notification from Temu. So, one of the things that I'm going to be sharing here with you today is how I've made my change from where I was and where I'm at now and where I see myself going. So that's what this video is about. Now, I'm not the one to teach you. I'm not going to sit here and say, you need to do this and you need to do that and tithe and you need to go to church and you need to serve the community and you do this. And it's not a checklist. It's not. Because everyone is different. Every one of us has our own endearing perspectives. And what I do won't be the same for you. But I hope that when I'm sharing, what I'm sharing really resonates with you so that you think, holy cow, some of that resonated with me and I can relate to that, but in a different manner. And I think that she's on the right track and I think I can do this too. That's what I want for you. Because during my journey, I've realized you have to do this on your own. You have to, to do this on your own. No one can help you. It has to come from you. And so while I was doing this, I made sure I got a lot of journals. So, and that's one thing that this channel, my YouTube channel is going to be, is going through my journals. And when I make a journal entry, I make sure I have my phone nearby. I make sure I have my TV on. I make sure that the lights are on. Because I have, like these lights behind me, these little, you can see coming up from the ground. And I have lights in my windows. And, so, and I make sure that my dog is around, or if I'm in nature, I'm outside. The reason I do this is because you have to take in your whole environment. When you're journaling and when you are in that space of receiving, you have to be in that space of receiving. So while I'm journaling, I'll have the TV on in the background, maybe turned down low. I'll have my lights on, and if they flicker a certain way, then it's a sign for me. Or if I hear something on the TV or commercial comes on about something specific that I've never heard of or that's something new, that's a sign for me. And so I would take a screenshot or a picture of it. If I get a ring notification that, someone's at my front door, or if I get a notification from the camera in my bedroom, or a notification from anything on my phone, whether it be any of my apps or video games or, any notification from anything, I use that in my journaling process. And I use those as tools, as signs to say, hey, you're on the right track here. Keep going. And if it's a radio, like your radio on in your car, and they say something, that's another sign. Or if you see something as you're out and about, and these could be little tiny signs, but only you will recognize because only you will resonate with that. That's how I live my life. I let the universe direct me. And because I haven't been able to trust the people that have been in my life, whether they've been forced to be in my life or whether I chose them. And I've made some pretty poor choices in my life, let me tell you. But those relationships all were signs. And I would see signs all the time and I would ignore them. But it wasn't until I started my journey that I really, really started paying attention to those signs. And I intentionally set signs in my life on my phone by setting alarms. So on my phone, I would set an alarm, and it could be at 1:03 p.m. every Tuesday, or it would be, and I would change these alarms. It was just a generic time throughout my day. And connected to those alarms were songs from my iTunes that I would help with a little saying in the notes of the alarm as to say, you're on the right track. And then I would play like Barracuda or something. And it wasn't the same every day. And it wasn't the same every hour. And it was always something different. And I would intentionally every Sunday, for about 3 weeks, every 3 weeks, I would rotate my calendar, my schedule for these alarms. And that's what started my journey back in 2019 when I was working at the UPS store in Dorset. My alarms, my phone would be in my pocket, and that alarm would go off while I'm up at the register, and I would pull it out when it would go off. And it wasn't the normal alarm, so it was a song from iTunes. And sometimes I would let that whole song play while I'm up there. And then after I'm finished with the customer or whatever I was doing, I would stop or pause or then reflect. Or sometimes I would just let it play and reflect as I'm working. So those alarms were intentionally set by me to help keep me in the moment, to let me know, keep watching for those signs. And I did that for about 2 years. And in 2020, I no longer needed those alarms. Well, because COVID hit and nobody was working the way they, schedules were all off and people were, you know what it was like. I don't need to say. So I stopped those alarms in 2020, but I continued my journey with my journals. Okay. I started my dark shadow journalizing in 2020. And I would share the things that I was learning about myself with whom I thought was my best friend. And, I thought that we had a connection, a real emotional connection. And then in 2024, when I realized we didn't, it was so hurtful and it was so painful that I broke on the inside. I hurt, physically hurt. I went to the emergency room. I thought I was dying. I was burning from the inside out. And that's another story, but that was my real breakthrough because I realized they didn't love me, not the way that I loved them. And in that saying started my book. You see, I know people love me and the way they can love me. I understand that, I didn't back then. I thought and I served. I thought that if I served and I gave 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 and gave and gave of myself, that I would get something back in return. But when I never did, I never got back what I gave, I got hurt because I was expecting it back at some point. And that's where Spirit was telling me, you can't expect that back. And so that was the revelation that I was like, okay, well, I'm going to stop giving. I'm not giving as much anymore to those people who kept taking and taking and taking. I'm not. Because it's not fair. I'm not going to give of my car. I'm not going to give of my truck. I'm not going to give of my money. I'm not going to give of my time. I'm not going to give of my space. I'm not going to give any more. And that was my cutoff. I sent everybody videos. I told them how I felt. I told them what was going on in my life and how I found out that my DNA does not match with the family that I was raised with. I even shared it with my brother, and he didn't even want any part of it. He's like, I don't want to be related to this anymore. I don't want you to use my name or my likeness in anything. I got a text message from him that just told me to go fuck off. And so I did. Um, my my mother, there's another story. I love my mother dearly. She was always there for me in the way that she could be. That was how she loved me. But that wasn't how I needed to be loved. I needed an emotional attachment, and I was never getting that. And it's not that, it was so much more. But let me tell you, it was so much more. But this was a real learning experience for me because I had figured this out on my own. Nobody had to tell me that. I knew that. I knew long ago where I was and where I sat in this family. And, it was not an easy process for me. So when I decided to do what I did with my family, it was to heal not only myself, but all those unemotional scars and traumas that they put out there on other people, not just me, but everybody around them. I want them to heal too, because it's just not fair. Life isn't fair. It never has been. And then when the choices that you make things even worse, what are you going to do? So you got to start with a whole new clean slate. And that's what I did in 2024. So beginning in 2025, I had a clean slate and I was beginning over. I was starting over. I gave everything away. I gave all my belongings away. I didn't even sell them. I gave them away. Now, I had to sell the house because I couldn't afford to just give the house away. Um, that was a large investment of mine. And I got that house because I wanted to be the matriarch of the family, where everybody came for the holidays and we played games and we opened presents and we shared meals. We went swimming and we celebrated together. But nobody else wanted that. I would invite them over for painting parties, and there was only one person that ever showed up. And so I realized they didn't want to be loved by me. So I had to move on. Therefore, I sold the house in April, May last year. And my plan was, everybody knows this, was to move to Malta. I had a job lined up. I had my dog's records all ready, her shots ready. I had all the paperwork in line to be an expat. I was going to live in Malta. I had an apartment. I was going to be a receptionist. I had everything lined up. But then when my closing didn't happen the way that it should have, I knew that there was some dark magic going on. I knew that people didn't want me to leave. They didn't want me to leave the country. They didn't, because they still wanted from me. But I wasn't going to give anybody anything anymore. So I allowed the flow to happen. I moved out of St. Louis, out to Jefferson City, Missouri, for about a week, maybe less than a week. I slept in a spare bedroom with an air mattress at a friend of mine who lived in Jeff City, who allowed me to stay there till I could figure out what I was going to do. And as I did that, I had a lot of awakenings, a lot of leveling up spiritually over the past year. And through my journeys, and I shared in my journals, and that's what this channel will be about. We will be going over my journals for the year and looking at the decisions that I've made in my life because of those journal writings and the signs that I was getting. And you will see a huge, eye-opening experience once you let the universe talk to you. So that's what we're here today for. And I hope that you learned something today, not just about me, but about yourself. That you can make changes no matter what someone's saying about you. You can make it. You can make it happen. Because I know I don't have all the answers, but I do know that I've been shown a lot of things. And I like to share that with you so that maybe it'll help you too.